Well, in honoring everyone's time, I am going to go ahead and get started. I can tell people are hopping on by the second, and we'll let them funnel in. So my name is Amy Alexander, and I am the Executive Director and co-founder of the Refuge Center for Counseling. Some of you are extremely familiar with the Refuge Center. Some of you have probably never heard of us before. I know that we have churches joining us from Alabama and Texas and really all over. So I just want to take a moment and tell you what the Refuge Center is. Perhaps in advance of this video, you may have gone to our website or our social media, but the Refuge Center for Counseling is a Christ-centered nonprofit counseling center. We have been in operation for 15 years, and it has always been our goal to provide excellent, affordable services and make them accessible to anyone. So at the Refuge Center, we offer a sliding fee scale for everyone who comes through our doors so that services truly are accessible to anyone. Our fees go as low as $19 and then all the way up to $120. On average, our clients pay about $45 per session. Our cost is $85, so that gap is what we have to supplement and fundraise for. We have over 60 counselors here at the Refuge Center who all have different areas of specialty. Probably the reasons that people reach out to us the most are anxiety, depression, grief and loss, trauma, and relational conflict. But we do just about anything you might imagine. And again, all of that on that sliding fee scale. Last year, we provided about 27,000 therapeutic contact hours for just over 3,700 people. So we're quite busy. In addition to standard counseling, we also offer neurofeedback and medication management. And of course, in the midst of this crisis, we've transitioned to primarily telehealth, at least over the last month. So we are able to serve anyone in the state of Tennessee through that telehealth platform. Otherwise, we were typically seeing people come to us from about 17 counties in the Middle Tennessee area. So that's a little bit about the Refuge Center, and it has been on our heart to, this is an unofficial phrase at the Refuge Center, but we always say we want to be a fountain, not a drain. And in that vein, we wanted to bring you some material today, free of charge, that you might find helpful as you're navigating this crisis and all the needs that your members have. So before we dig in, I want to start off by thanking our church partner hosts who have helped us spread the word about this event. I will list them, and then if each one of them just want to say a hello or a quick word, that would be great. So Jason Thompson is with the Harpeth Hills Church of Christ, Jeff Simmons and Kathy Kuhn with Rolling Hills Community Church, Lindsay Harris with Church of the City, and Ken Core with Brentwood Baptist. So if each one of you want to just say hello and let people know who you are. All right, so Jason Thompson's up there, Jeff and Kathy.
Hey, everybody. It's great to be on. Amy, thanks for doing this. We're looking forward to it.
So glad. Thank you guys for being a part of this and helping. I see Lindsay, and then Ken may have jumped on. He may be on a second or third page. Ken Core, are you there? Okay. I don't see him yet. Maybe he's joining us soon. So our church partner hosts were able to help us get the word out, and we're so grateful for that. So I thought I'd start by asking Jason Thompson, who is a member of our partnership council, to open us with a word of prayer. Jason, if you don't mind.
I'll do that, but I'm also excited, Amy, that we have folks here from Montana, Colorado, Alabama, Texas, and any other state I'm missing. I love this. I love the body of Christ. I think this pandemic is helping us to even have a more global view. So thank you for the Refuge Center. And what a blessing to have this expertise to at least stir our thinking today. So let's pray together. Lord, in our brief time, would you do mighty works? Would you prepare the way for us as leaders in local churches? God, we still believe that the power in the gospel is to change lives. And Lord, when the Holy Spirit intersects with any of our members, there's also a life formed by trauma and a life formed by unique stories. And Lord, we believe that this moment, at this time in your history, will be an opportunity for the church to lead the way. So bless us, Lord. Bless each church that's here, and bless each leader. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jason. Well, what we know for sure is that each of you have congregations that you shepherd, and that very likely many people in your congregations have been impacted significantly by this crisis. Some of them have lost jobs, some of them have been ill, perhaps even lost family members. And so undoubtedly, you're going to be having people walk into your offices or call your receptionist with a lot of pain. And they're going to be looking to church leaders to help guide and support them. And so we just wanted to come alongside of you and present you with some information that would be helpful as you're getting these calls and emails, etc. So what we have is we have 4 of our senior staff, I'm included among that, who are going to be presenting to you. Each of them have 10 minutes of material to give you, and then we've reserved 10 minutes at the end for Q&A, and we will end right at 1 o'clock. What I would say is there's going to be a lot of good content here, definitely some tidbits and takeaways. So I'd encourage you, if you don't already have a pen and paper, please grab something so that you can be making notes, or you may be typing notes on your computer or phone. That's fine too. First up, from 2:10 to 2:20, we have Pike Williams. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and on senior staff here oversees our Postmasters Fellows program. Pike's going to be talking about how to help your congregations process their emotional experience of this crisis. At 2:20, Anita Pringle, who is an LPC MHSP, is going to be talking about the PTSD and trauma that some of your people have experienced and how to help them with that. She's also going to talk a little bit about self-care for each of you as ministers. At 2:30, Tina Good, also LPC MHSP, is going to talk about how some of our congregants perhaps have engaged in some self-defeating behaviors or even addictions during this time as a coping mechanism. So she's going to talk about that. And then I'm going to spend 10 minutes at 2:40 talking about grief and loss. So I will not introduce speakers in between. They will transition naturally. And I'm going to go ahead and open it up right now for Pike Williams to begin his portion. And we'll save Q&A for 2:50.
Okay, well, I trust that everyone can hear me all right. If not, please let me know. It's a pleasure to be with you. This is really a difficult time for the world, and it has triggered a lot of stress, whether it's physical stress, certainly, fear of the virus, or social stress, financial stress, political stress. All we need to do is turn on any kind of media. We see that. Relational stress, in my family, we've got adult children home and a son-in-law with us, and it's not what they would want. It's not really what we would want, but it's good. It's just not altogether easy, right? And so with all this, there's a lot of stress out there. And how do we know there's stress? Well, one way we know there's stress, and maybe the best way, is the presence of our emotions. Emotions are an interesting thing in that we deal with them, we recognize them in different ways. And this is a time for the church in that within our body, we know that there are some people who are solid and they're doing well in spite of these crazy circumstances. And they're in a position to help other people who may be struggling, kind of like Amy was talking about, people who are struggling and they're trying to get their feet under them. And so we're going to kind of be talking about the men and women and the families in your congregations who maybe are struggling right now a little bit. So in talking about emotions, let me just offer this metaphor that, or first of all, let me offer a reframe that although emotions are not always pleasant, they're always good. Okay, they're always good. Kind of like the dashboard of our car. If we're driving down the road and one of the lights comes on, none of us like that. None of us look forward to seeing the red light come on, but at the same time, we would acknowledge that it's a good thing that the light was there because it signals to us something needs attention. And in a similar way, that's how our emotions are. We've all been created with an emotional system in our brain. It resides in the limbic part of the brain, And it's important to just acknowledge its presence and to engage it in a healthy way, because it can be extremely helpful for us to get through situations just like we're in right now. Well, what happens to us physiologically when our emotions activate, or the limbic part of the brain activates, which is where the emotions reside? A couple of really important things happen. First of all, the blood flow in our body shifts as the adrenaline or the adrenal system activates in our body. There's this idea, we've all experienced it. For example, when we feel either physically or emotionally threatened, we've noticed the rush of adrenaline that can come on us.
Video's off.
And sorry, had a brief interruption there. I hope everyone can hear me all right. And so when the adrenaline comes online, it changes the flow of blood from our thoughtful, reflective, reasoning part of the brain to more of the hypervigilant, even defensive part of the brain. Essentially, or simply stated, the fight or flight response can be activated. And so again, we've all felt that, and just recognize that sometimes when emotions are coming on, the adrenaline can be activated, and it's not 0 or 100. It can be at 10% or 50%, just like your thermostat can be set. And so many of the people that we know and love are walking around at different times during the day with the adrenaline on. And when the adrenaline is running, it's very fatiguing. And it also kind of takes offline our ability to rest well as our appetite, and our digestive systems will also go offline, because the blood is shifted again to our muscles and to the hypervigilant parts of the brain. So it's kind of a fascinating thing as the body prepares itself to defend itself. And so even though we all have a lot of time to rest right now, unfortunately, we're not experiencing that, or at least all of us are not experiencing that, because of this physiological response to the stress and the emotions that we're experiencing. Now, what are these emotions? Well, I mentioned fear, also anger. And you probably know people, maybe you felt a little bit this yourself. We're just angry that this is happening. This is interrupting our lives, be it graduations or weddings, or it's terrible. People we know and love are passing away. We're not able to get to funerals, things of that nature. So anger can definitely be an emotion that's present. Other emotions, certainly hurt, sadness, loneliness, guilt, and shame can all be present at a time like this. So many people that we are going to encounter and that we are trying to care for are going to be experiencing their emotions in very significant ways. So let's talk about how we respond to that. Before we do, I want to just mention a couple of misconceptions about emotions, because some of the people that you're going to be caring for may struggle to share really what they're feeling easily. And why is that? Well, of course, probably no surprise to you, in the Western culture, kind of suppressing emotion is often chosen as an optimal strategy for dealing with emotions, because many of us were brought up in families or social situations where to express a vulnerable emotion or an unpleasant emotion just simply wasn't welcome. That's particularly true in the masculine culture. Men especially will have a difficult time acknowledging that they're afraid or that something has hurt them. And so that, of course, we can trace that to maybe an overzealous coach or a boss, or perhaps a lesson on the playground at an early age. But nonetheless, men and women many times will have difficulty acknowledging the presence of their emotions at a time when they really need to be acknowledging it for their mental and physical health. The interesting thing, though, is that research clearly shows that suppressing emotion not only doesn't help it, it actually makes it worse. So denying an emotion is there actually heightens the response in the limbic part of the brain. And so this is exactly why we want to kind of deal with it in a positive, healthy way as we're working with people that we love. So a better strategy is, rather than suppress it, let's respond to it in a really, really good way. So I'm going to offer you 4 or 5 things here just real quickly that might be helpful to you. First of all, just recognize in ourselves and others when something is wrong. The word emotion literally means to move us. And all of us have lived enough life to know that while we don't welcome the pain, we know that oftentimes the pain leads to something meaningful, or actually something even good. In other words, there's purpose in the pain. And so realizing that when the sort of the metaphorical light comes on, dealing with that and giving that attention can be extremely helpful to us and people in our sphere of influence and people we're in a relationship with. Secondly, so first of all, recognizing it and acknowledging it. Secondly, and this is real important, to normalize the presence of emotions right now. You know, when our lungs work or when our kidneys are functioning as they're intended, we don't shame ourselves about that, or we don't feel badly about that. We're glad that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And in the same way, emotions are just like that. So when our emotions are on and we're feeling scared or we're feeling angry, it's okay. Now, of course, we want to be able to process those emotions in healthy ways, but we are trying to acknowledge that it's normal to feel emotions right now, especially in the presence of these stresses. And this is so important in the church because while many of our congregants are doing well, not everyone is doing well. And so we just want to create space for all of that. You know, no surprise, and this is particularly important, I think, for all of us to keep in mind. Sometimes people believe that if I'm a good Christian, or if I'm doing what the Lord wants me to do, I'm not going to have an unpleasant emotion. And so we want to help people differentiate between experiencing an emotion and then how to handle it in a healthy way. And there's much to be said biblically and otherwise about how to process our emotions and what do we do when we're afraid. And we just want to help people understand it's okay to feel an emotion, so to normalize it. So first of all, to recognize it, then to normalize it. Thirdly, and this is so important, to empathize or to show empathy. What do we mean when we say empathy? It's really the idea of loving other people. It's at the core of loving others this way. It's the ability to genuinely understand, listen, and connect to what they're experiencing. So it's sort of like stepping out of your world into their world, sort of getting into their mud puddle, if I can use that expression, and understanding what they're experiencing. To empathize with someone is so helpful, and it is absolutely critical for people to be able to feel like they can express an unpleasant emotion in a safe way to another person, or to another safe person in a safe way. And don't worry, when they calm down, they'll have questions and they will ask you the questions, and there'll always be time to deal with specific questions, but initially just connecting with them. And so here's the thing, language like, instead of maybe offering them a solution, just get them to tell you more about what they're feeling. Or just say to them, hey, I'm glad you told me that. Tell me more about that. How long have you felt that way? Those are great things to say to people. What isn't so helpful is to say something like, well, you know, things could be worse. Or, you know, you have a lot to be thankful for. I've done that, okay, and I've had that done to me. And it doesn't feel good because it feels like, in a way, we're telling people that they shouldn't feel the way they're feeling. And that is not welcome. And so we're trying to develop some language here as we empathize with people, just to be with them and to let them express their emotions. Fourthly, I love this expression. Sometimes people have a difficult time naming their emotion. And so let's just call this one, name it to tame it. So when a person is struggling to really identify their emotion, men in particular, they may say something like, well, I'm just frustrated, when what they really mean is I'm scared or I'm angry. And so helping them kind of make sense out of what's happening by ask them, what exactly are you feeling right now? Or to even say to them, are you feeling a little angry about that? Those are fair things to ask them. Fifthly, and I'll close with this, if a person that you encounter seems highly dysregulated or highly anxious, just encourage them to sit down and to lead them, if you can, through some deep breathing. Just be still. Let's just sit here, be still, lead them through some breathing that will help their body calm itself. And that's a great thing to do. Related to that, water to help them hydrate well is great because that will dilute some of the adrenaline hormones in their body. And also, when the adrenaline is pumping, it generates a lot of energy. And so if you're going to meet with someone and you can go for a walk with them, that's much better than just sitting somewhere, because it'll help them kind of burn some emotional energy as they're talking with you. So I'm going to stop right here. I thank you all for listening. I wish you well. If we can ever help you in any way, of course, let us know. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to, I believe, Anita's next.
Thanks, Pike. I prefer to have conversation when I talk to people, but this is not an opportunity for that. So if I could unmute everybody and we had time for you to share what your list of emotions during this COVID-19 time was. Some of the things that Pike mentioned and some others would come up, like anxiety, fear, isolation, loneliness, concern, feeling robbed of something, depression, a sense of being overtaken or out of control, frustration, confusion, disbelief. These are all trauma-producing feelings. They are things that cause us to experience trauma in our lives. And in the last couple of months, we probably all have experienced some trauma because we've never been in a situation like this before. Some of that trauma may have come from a tornado or the loss of a job or the pandemic itself. So all of those things can cause trauma in the lives of the people that you work with. The last time that we experienced a trauma collectively across the United States or maybe in the world was probably when 9/11 happened. And truth be known, probably everybody in the United States had some sense of overarching trauma because of that event in our life. And this has been the same way with what we have experienced locally with the trauma of the tornadoes and also what the pandemic has brought about. When we think about PTSD, immediately our mind goes to something that happens to people who have been to war. Although we've not been fighting a traditional war, I think that we've been in battle fighting, and that has caused trauma in our lives. Now, in the therapeutic world, we talk about big T trauma and little t trauma, but I like to just talk about trauma in general because what might be a big T trauma for me might be a little t trauma for you, and vice versa. I don't think we can just say, oh, this list of things are big T traumas and this list of things are little t traumas, because as Pike talked about, in our congregations, we have some people who have experienced some trauma, but they're doing pretty well. They might be little t trauma. We are experiencing some trauma that seems like a big T trauma. So trauma affects people in different ways. Those that we serve as parishioners, or for those of us who are therapists as clients, will be affected differently, but we will likely all be affected in some way, which may cause increased anger, fear, anxiety, depression, grief, the use of self-medicating behaviors, things of that nature, which are all the things that we're talking about today. And as people of faith, I believe that it is so very important that we normalize these feelings for those who seek and or need support from us. I spent many years, 30 plus years, working in local churches before I did a second career and became a therapist. And we often come across as if you have enough faith, then you shouldn't experience these particular feelings. And just as Pike was talking about a minute ago, the feelings that they're experiencing are their feelings. And God gave us those emotions and those feelings. So we need to be ready to normalize those and let those people know that the things that they're feeling are very real. A lot of people talk about PTSD, and there's specific criteria that define what PTSD is, but even if they don't fit the criteria, they may have experienced a significant trauma which still brings about trauma responses in their lives and the lives of those that they come in contact with. And with time and good support, the symptoms could be mitigated before full-blown PTSD occurs. So I just want to quickly give you some symptoms of what PTSD might look like. But just remember, PTSD is trauma that lasts over a period of time, an extended period of time. So you might be feeling these things, but if we can get to them soon enough, then potentially they won't move into full-blown PTSD. Those feelings are feeling detached or numb, feeling guilt, panic, anxiety, anger, being easily startled, depression, problems sleeping, and things of that nature. So to help support those who are struggling with trauma responses, then I would encourage these things. Of course, as people of faith, we would first encourage prayer, Bible reading, meditation, because those are so supportive. Journaling, exercising, mindfulness, yoga, counsel from godly leaders in the faith community. The work that you all do is so very important. Also checking our thought processes, because negative thoughts cause negative feelings, which cause negative behaviors. And so I talk with my clients often about this: is the glass is half empty or the glass is half full. We tend to think about the glass being half empty, which is interesting because the glass half full and the glass half empty has the same thing in it. They both have the same thing. And I recently saw something on Facebook that said you can have a glass half full, a glass half empty, or as the psalmist says, my cup runneth over. And so we get to choose the way that we think about things. And sometimes just the very act of thinking about things from a more positive aspect than negative can be helpful for us. Also, I think it's important for us to focus on what we can control, not what we can't control. We've started moving back into a situation where we're trying to get out and about a little bit. We can control the way that we do that individually. We can't control the way other people do that. So we need to focus on our own stuff. Another thing that you can do is to limit media time. I know when this first started, I sat in front of a TV all day long, and by the end of the day, I was spent from just listening to the same stories over and over and over again. And of course, another option is to encourage your people to find a counselor. You knew I would say that probably, but I think that is an important thing as well. But, in the last couple of months, I've had very few sessions with my clients about the presenting issues that they were coming to see me for before all of this happened. Most of the sessions that I have done have been to support the trauma that people are experiencing presently with the virus and the pandemic that we're experiencing. And so those things, the things that they came to see me for have taken a back seat right now because the trauma is present in their life. So I think that supporting your parishioners is very important, but it can't be done, and it can't be done well if you're not taking good care of yourselves. As I said earlier, I spent more than 30 years in local church ministry, and as pastors, we likely will put ourselves last and not take care of ourselves. And sometimes the expectations of our congregation don't allow us to care for ourselves. After all, your faith is so strong. You have a direct line to God, and it's impossible that you too might be feeling the same effects that those who depend on you are having. Just this morning, I heard a quote from Eugene Peterson that says, "How can I lead people beside the still waters if I'm in perpetual motion?" And so I would encourage you to slow down. You have concerns, you have trauma responses, you have need for support. And in order for you to care for those who are depending on you, you've got to take care of yourself first. In other words, you've got to put on that oxygen mask first before you help other people. So quickly, here's some things you can do for yourself. Be sure to make time for your own support with prayer, Bible reading, exercise, family, and friends. Disconnect from the trauma around you from time to time, because we're just in it every minute. And so I would tell you, turn off your phone and your other devices so that you can really be present with your family or with God or whatever. Allow yourself to be real enough to embrace your own feelings. And the last one may be the hardest one, and that is to ask for help yourself. So we all, pastors, therapists, and congregations, will feel the effects of this time of trauma. Life as we've known it will not be the same. Mental health needs will be at an all-time high. And we at the Refuge Center look forward to working collaboratively with you to support those whom God has entrusted to your care, and with you who are called to care for others. And so now Tina will share with you.
Thanks, Anita. I'm like everybody else. I hope you can hear me okay. Want to start out first with a little guided meditation. So I'm going to ask you, if you will, just to sit back for a moment and imagine that a member of your congregation has come to you, or a friend, and shared that they have just been diagnosed with cancer, or that their loved one, a member of their family, has just received a cancer diagnosis, or congestive heart failure, something like that. Notice how you feel and how your heart responds. Now imagine that a member of your congregation has come and told you that they are struggling with an addiction to alcohol, or that they're drinking until they're passed out and can't remember anything night after night, or that a spouse or loved one in their family is struggling with a porn addiction. Do you notice any shift in your response to that, and the feelings that you have as you gather this information? And just be aware of what you're feeling in that moment. So I want to talk, Pike and Anita have both talked about some of the things that people are experiencing. And, you know, our natural behavior is to want to avoid pain. We don't put our hand on a hot stove. We try to avoid that. And I think so often people try to do that with emotions. And like Pike said, emotions are good. But whether it's the discomfort or the grief, the not knowingness of what's going on, it may be job loss, feeling uncertain, out of control, feeling like they have disappointed their family or not going to be able to support family, and that sense of fear, people sometimes pick up behaviors to avoid that, to self-medicate, for distraction or boredom. But nobody picks up a drink or a game controller or clicks on Amazon and starts shopping, turns on Netflix, turns on their computer. No one does that with the intention of creating a long-term problem. But just as in our meditation where someone has cancer, in addiction, what we find is that something goes wrong in an organ, typically in our brain, that creates an addiction, and something that was not meant to be a problem becomes a problem, and addiction is formed. So I want to talk a little bit about what happens. And it doesn't matter whether it's a substance or it's a behavior, the brain gets overloaded with dopamine. God was very gracious and set our brain up to tell us what we need, to reward us when we get those things that we need. So, you know, having food is very good for us. We need that for survival. And so when we have something pleasurable, food, air, water, sex for procreation, those type things, our brain gets a surge of dopamine. What often happens when it's hit with substances or other things like that is we get an overload of dopamine, and the brain can't take that on. And the more it is impacted by that, then there becomes a defect in our brain, and we start seeing symptoms of the disease of addiction. And so whereas the brain is hardwired for survival, we have to eat, we want to survive, as I said, you know, procreation so that we continue as a people. But what happens with the drugs or the behavior is they then take the place of basic survival things. So in the hijacked brain, individuals begin thinking that they need the drug just like they need air and water to survive. And granted, that is not really a conscious thought, but the hijacked brain is what is telling the person. So if you couldn't get to air, if you and I couldn't get to air, we'd do whatever we had to do to get air. So that's where the loss of control and the craving and the continued use in spite of negative consequences comes in, is because there is now a defect in the brain, and the brain has been hijacked, creating the addiction. It is not a moral failing. Like I said, no one picks anything up wanting it to become a problem or have an impact on the people they love in their own lives. So what we see when things go from, when addiction becomes a problem, we start seeing the impact through impaired control, impact on families, failure to meet responsibilities, possible withdrawal from families, increased time on activities. People sometimes start using in a way that's unhealthy or risky, maybe going out and not social distancing, given the pandemic, putting themselves at risk, going places that they shouldn't, to have access or to meet other people. And then we also see increased tolerance or irritability or withdrawal as people try to stop using, because a lot of times as someone begins using or engaging in behaviors, they feel a lot of guilt and shame, because addiction leads to a lot of guilt and shame. Because if you're constantly feeling guilty and shameful, then you want to use so that you don't have to feel those feelings. And so, you know, I look at it, the addiction is very much like the liar who shames and condemns people, making them wanting to continue to use. And so we see the continued use in spite of negative repeated consequences as a real key indicator that we are dealing with an addictive situation. One thing that's really important to realize is that if there are abusive or addictive use issues in a behavior or a substance, it is not just the individual that is using the substance that is being impacted. It is the entire family system. So if you imagine in this mobile, they all hang there gently, but if one piece of the mobile is pulled out of proportion, then the whole mobile skews to one side. And so being aware that if you have a member of the congregation that comes and says, I'm dealing with an addiction, the entire family has been impacted. It is a family disease. And so everyone's going to need help and support. So how's the best way to help? Well, in Romans, we're told, God didn't send his son to condemn the world. And like I said, so often addiction shames people and does condemn them. So the best thing, and I think Pike mentioned this earlier, is being able to meet people where they are, understanding that and having that compassion and empathy to say, that sounds really hard. Just like if someone comes and says, I've got cancer, that sounds really hard. I'm sorry. Acknowledge that they're not alone. There are millions of people that have faced disease and addiction. They are not alone in this. There is connection and community versus the shaming. And know that there is always help. There is help and there is hope. Again, millions of people have walked this path and now live in long-term recovery. And instilling in them that there is hope and they are not the only ones. And then providing them with resources and referrals, in addition to prayer and support. So like Anita, I'm going to tell you, counseling is a great thing, helping people increase that awareness, giving them medical assessment, suggesting they go see their doctor, especially if they're dealing with addiction to alcohol, because sudden withdrawal from that can be an issue. 12-step groups are still having Zoom meetings all over the country. I'm sure many of you have 12-step meetings that meet in your churches and in your locations. Thank you for that. The recovery community thanks you for that, and families in recovery, thank you for that. But meetings are available via Zoom. Celebrate Recovery is also meeting via Zoom. And depending on the level of severity, treatment centers are still open and taking clients in if that kind of long-term inpatient treatment is necessary. But the biggest thing to remember is that there is hope. As long as there is breath in the body, there is always hope. And I have the quote from Jeremiah up because, God has plans for hope in the future. So thank you for what you do for serving people well and for meeting them empathetically.
Thank you so much, Tina. Well, I want to suggest that this feeling that maybe you've had over the last 7 to 9 weeks, whether it be in your chest or in your gut or in your head, this feeling you've been having, it might be grief. The definition of grief is that grief is a reflection of a connection that's been lost. Sometimes that connection is to an ideal or an expectation, right? So in this situation, the ideal might be the ideal life we had been living, the things we had looked forward to, the vacations we had planned. It might have been the expectation that our bank accounts would look the way they had, that we'd go on being able to plan a summer and camps and all the things that we expected. So our grief is a reflection of these losses. And I want to name the losses because you may want to name these for the people that you're caring for. Again, because it normalizes, why is this feeling so big in my chest? Why do I feel such heaviness? So we've lost normalcy. We have. We've lost connection the way we knew it to be. There has been massive economic loss. We've lost our sense of felt safety. Can I go to Walmart? Can I go to a restaurant? Am I safe to leave my home? And we've lost our sense of personal autonomy and freedom. So major, significant, meaningful losses. Most of you are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Of course, she created the stages of grief, which we know are not linear. Here's how they might have felt to us with COVID-19. So we think of the stage of denial. Early on, that might have been people saying, this won't affect me. I won't know anyone that'll get sick. It won't look like here, it looks like in Italy. Then we might have hit anger. You may have found people saying, you're making me stay home You're taking away my activities, my freedoms, and boy, anger may have just scaled up. Then we hit that stage of bargaining where we're going, okay, so if I social distance for a couple of weeks, then everything will be back to normal. It'll be better, right? Then there's that sadness phase of grief. I don't know when this will end. I don't know how it will end. I'm grieving the uncertainty. And finally, there's acceptance. And acceptance looks like, this is happening. I have to figure out a way to proceed. David Kessler, who wrote a lot of books with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, has actually gone to the Ross Society and asked for official permission to add a sixth stage to grief. And it's called finding meaning. So after we've been through denial and anger and bargaining and depression and acceptance, then our work becomes finding meaning in our grief. And I just can't emphasize this strongly enough, that you as ministers and pastors and lay leaders and compassionate care directors, these are the conversations that are going to be happening in your offices. People are going to sit down across from you or call you, and they're going to say, where was God in this? Who am I now? After I've lost my job, my income, my spouse, who am I now? And what does God ask of me or want me to do in a season like this? These are philosophical questions that your members are going to want to sit across from you and talk to you about. And what are they doing? They're trying to find meaning in their grief. So all of you know 1 Thessalonians 4:13, and that verse essentially tells us that we don't grieve as people without hope. We can approach our grief with hope. So some takeaways that I want to give to you as you help people identify their grief. First and foremost, it's okay to call it that. It's okay to name their experiences through the lens of grief and loss. Mr. Rogers, he said, if it's mentionable, it's manageable. If it's mentionable, it's manageable. That just means if we can talk about it, we can get through it. So let's talk about it. If we can feel it, we can heal it. If we can name it, we can manage it. All of those things are provoking us to talking about what we're experiencing. If you have someone in your office who is experiencing a great deal of fear and anxiety, as a pastor, you might feel equipped to help someone navigate that. It might feel overwhelming. So I want to give you 6 quick things that you can just say or address. You might send someone out of your office with this exercise. As you think about your fear and anxiety, what's the worst thing that could happen? What's the best thing that could happen? And what's likely to happen? Okay, that is a great journaling exercise. What's the worst thing that could happen? What's the best thing that could happen? What's likely to happen? This is kind of fun. When we have someone who's going to anxiety, which is an imagined fear about a future event that has not happened, we can just tell ourselves, I've bought a ticket to a bad movie and I need to leave the theater. I bought a ticket to a bad movie and I need to leave the theater. Essentially what that's saying is just come back to the present moment. Maybe you still have your job, your mortgage is paid, everyone in your family's okay. Let's come back to that. Third is just letting people know that it's okay to cry. I think I read somewhere that crying alone in your car right now counts as an act of self-care. It really does. It's okay to say, I'm having a hard time. I'm having a bad day. I'm not okay today. I'm not good. So give people permission to say that. When you feel an emotion, your job is to feel it. Because when you feel an emotion, the next one comes, we feel it, we move forward. Pike and Anita and Tina have all talked about that. In part of normalizing our fears and our anxieties, I just want to say, one of the reasons that social distancing is hard is because grief is meant to be witnessed by another person. That is how God designed us. I won't go into this, but when we cry tears in front of another person, cortisol, which is the stress hormone in the body, not only do those tears release cortisol, but in the presence of another person, that cortisol level doubles. So God designed us to cry and to weep and to suffer in community. And we aren't meant to be islands of grief, but this pandemic has literally forced us to be islands in our grief. So just normalize for people. It's that hard. It feels that hard because it really is that hard. Fifth, allow people to be where they are. Don't try to talk them out of their sadness. Don't try to minimize it. Grief, Kessler says, is as unique as everyone's fingerprint. Your grief is unique as your fingerprint. Also notice that you may witness someone and you may feel like their grief seems disproportionate to their circumstances. So one thing I'd like you to notice is that sometimes our grief is related to our present circumstances, but sometimes it's historical grief, which compounds it, okay? And what I mean by that is that something you might be feeling today is also something that reminds you of another time in your life when you felt helpless or alone. So that complicates our grief when we're reminded of things from the past that are maybe still not resolved. And finally, just give people space to freely release their tears. You don't have to have the right words. You don't have to help them stop crying. Freely releasing our tears accelerates healing. One last thing I want to offer is that you may be judging, when do I navigate this through the church and when do I refer out to a counselor? So I want to give a very quick metaphor for what is traumatic bereavement. When do you know to encourage someone to call a counselor? So here's the metaphor. Our losses are like a river, and that river is always flowing. That river won't ever go away. The sadness about losing a child, the sadness about losing our dream job, we won't ever not have sadness around that. So that river, it's flowing, and sometimes it's flowing and it's murky and it's muddy and it's just barely a trickle. Other days it's flowing freely and the sun is shining down and kind of sparkling off the water. And your job as pastors and my job as a clinician is never to take someone's grief river from them. That river reminds them of something that meant something that's been lost. When it becomes problematic is when that river gets dammed up with like sticks, like a beaver dam, and those sticks pile up and they keep the river from flowing. And those sticks typically represent the way something ended, okay? So maybe it was the last look on someone's face before they died. Maybe it was this thing I always wanted to tell this person and I didn't say it before they passed away. Maybe it's the way my boss sent an email to me to let me know I no longer had my job. And the way it ended tends to complicate grief. So if you're meeting with someone and their river is dammed up with all of these negative images that are creating stress in their body and they can't get past how it ended, that prevents them from accessing positive memories of that person or their experience, that's traumatic bereavement. So when you find that someone is stuck there, that's when I would encourage you to enlist the support and help of a counselor who can help process those traumatic elements. And what we do is one by one, we pull those sticks out of the river so that there's some more freedom in grief. So that concludes the educational portion, so to speak. We've got just a few minutes for Q&A. And so if anybody has a pressing question, we'd like to that for you can stay on mute if you don't have a question, just to help you practice your voice.
Hey, Amy, this is
Someone is still muted there.
Hey, Amy, this is Jason Thompson. Got a question for you. Would you address how temperament and maybe Enneagram, personality types, how that is going to impact the way our members have processed or are processing right now?
Sure, let me ask Anita, Tina, or Pike if any of them want to speak to that. Go ahead, Pike. Were you about to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, absolutely, people are different. And I'm a 6 on the Enneagram, Jason, you know, and you may know, or if you don't, it doesn't matter, but we 6s tend to be skeptical. We also struggle sometimes with fear. We tend to struggle sometimes with having adequate faith. We can talk a better game sometimes than we can live out. And so for me, I may process things through that lens when I'm in a stressed place. But just as the Enneagram suggests, when I'm not stressed, or as we've been talking here today, when I find myself able to express my emotions, when I find some safe people who care and can offer compassion, I can make my way to a healthy space on the Enneagram, if for those who are familiar with that. And I can be significantly different. So it's a wonderful question, and it does speak to the differences. Amy was kind of talking about that. Everyone processes grief differently. People's experience, Tina talked about that, Anita did as well, that people are different, and we need to just recognize that and give everyone room to be different and to be themselves. And so yeah, we've got to consider it. Okay, short answer.
Extra grace is needed all across the board. If you're not familiar with Enneagram and you'd like a helpful resource, there's a book called The Road Back to You by Susan Stabile and Ian Cron, and I would highly recommend that you grab that as a resource. It's a great self-awareness tool, as well as helping understand your members and their spiritual paths to transformation in their own lives. Any other questions? We probably can just take one more.
Amy, I got a question. So what do you think is the best way to help talk to our people about just coming back unified? Because there's going to be a lot of people who are like ready to rush back and, you know, be back at church or be back in ministry. And then there's other people who are like, oh, you're so irresponsible. How can you come back this quick? And there's some people who want to wear a mask, and there's other people who are like, what in the world? Look at the numbers, you know? So how can we, with our congregation, help bring people back in a sense of unity and worship and not in division? Does that make sense?
It does, Jeff. That is a phenomenal question. I bet you're asking a question that everyone on this call is navigating. You know, for one thing, I would say, let's let the church set the standard for best practices. You know, if your local officials are recommending certain best practices, let's set the standard so that people feel really safe coming back when they're ready to do that. But I would say that everything about this is so highly personalized and unique. And I think it's very important that we not say, you should do this, you should feel this. If people feel okay to come back, great. If they don't, great. If they want to wear a mask, great. If they don't, great. Let's give people a lot of room to discern for themselves what they feel safe with and make those decisions without judgment. Every family, every person has to make those decisions with prayer and conversation, and we cannot judge people for the steps that they need to feel safe. We all have different family of origins. You know, we're going to do some things here at the Refuge Center. We're going to take temperatures. We have a one-way flow of traffic, all those kinds of things. And I recognize that when someone comes in this building, if they grew up in a family where they never felt protected, where they felt like nobody had their back, they're going to come here and they're going to go, this feels great. They've taken all the safety measures. They're looking out for me. If they came from a highly anxious family where everybody was afraid and tiptoed and was nervous about everything, they might go, well, this feels like overkill. Okay, so people are coming from different backgrounds, and we have to give people space to make decisions that are right for them. If anybody needs to hop off because we're at the top of the hour, feel free to do that. But Jeff, what you've asked feels so important. Would any other pastors or Refuge staff like to speak to that? Let's just take a few more minutes.
Yeah, I think, Amy, what you said is so important. You know, meeting people where they are and having compassion and that empathy to say, you know, I may not agree, but trying to understand where somebody else is coming from. And so often, you know, when we're talking about, well, they should this or they should that, what we fail to recognize is that for the most part, as humans, we have the opinions and the beliefs we do out of a place of love. And so trying to come together and understanding and love why someone would feel differently than we do and respecting their feelings while also, you know, making room for differences.
Mm.
And just, again, meeting people where they are.
Jeff, does that word, say a bit more about that word unified, what that means to you in the role that you're in?
Yeah, I think you and Tina did a great job answering that. I think as pastors, as shepherds of our flock, we're going to have people on both sides of the spectrum,
Yes.
and we want people to come back united in Christ and rejoicing. You know, there's so many things that divide us right now, and we're entering into the presidential, you know, campaign, which is going to be more division. But I really see this tension between, you know, when do you reopen and when do people come back to church, or when do they come back to community groups, or when, you know, small groups, or and you're already feeling this. Some people are like, you know, let's go. What are we waiting for? You know, why is the church so slow in responding? Businesses are open, you know, Costco's open and Walmart. Why is the church? Where's our faith? You know, don't we believe in God? God can protect us. You know, and then you got other people who are going, don't be irresponsible. The church should be the leaders and we need to protect our community. So, you know, and we have to listen and discern, I think, what you and Tina are saying, and we want to be on the forefront of that. But we also want to be wise to help our people process in a way to come back healthy. You know, we want people to feel safe, but we also want people to be, you know, faithful to God and be able to worship. So, so I think it's, you know, I think we've been in the pandemic, and a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, how do we help people process through that? And the stuff that you were talking about on grief, Amy, was so good and so spot on. But now I think the conversation is going to also be like, how do we help people not be judgmental, and how do we help people be loving as people come back and re-engage, you know?
And yes, there's the unified, unified.
Yeah. So I think that's healthy for us, you know, and how do we process that on the individual side, but on the congregation side as well.
I think one other thing, Jeff, is knowing that all we can do is make the best decision we can with the information we have at the moment. You know, and when we have more information, we may make a different decision, but how do we make the best decision, the next best right decision we can for today based on the knowledge we have? And just acknowledging that that's all we've got for today. And tomorrow, as we know more, we may do different.
Well, in respect of your time, that's where we're going to pause. I can see great value in us perhaps reconnecting at some point. So if you did not RSVP, it means we don't have your contact information, and we want to stay in touch with you. We want to bring you encouraging, hopeful, helpful content, and we want to serve you. So if we don't have your contact information, would you please send that to lisa.martin@therefugecenter.org. lisa.martin@therefugecenter.org. We're going to follow up by sending you a recording of this event. And if we hear from you that you'd like to have another conversation, that there's other content we didn't touch on, or that this just might be a place to process, we want to help facilitate that. So send us a message. I hope that you feel this was a good hour of your time. So good to be alongside other people serving in this kingdom, and just what a blessing this was to us. So thank you guys so much, and we'll be in touch, okay?
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.